A little history of the Bush family. I'm having a lot of fun. Okay. This is from a book called The Unauthorized Biography of George Bush, which is an extremely well-researched book. And everything that they put in here is sourced. If we go to George Herbert Walker Bush's father, Prescott Bush, he was the managing director of a firm called Brown Brothers Harriman during the 30s and 40s. Brown Brothers Harriman financed Adolf Hitler before and during World War II. Brown Brothers Harriman got involved with the Hamburg steamship line. They got involved with a number of companies and front organizations that channeled money directly to Adolf Hitler, and they did not stop that relationship when the war began. As a matter of fact, one particular firm, it was a bank affiliated, it was the Union Bank, affiliated with the Thyssen, that's T-H-Y-S-S-E-N, Steel Trust, managed by Prescott Bush, produced 50.8% of Nazi Germany's pig iron, 41.4% of Nazi Germany's universal plate, 36% of Nazi Germany's heavy plate, 38.5% of Nazi Germany's galvanized steel, 45.5% of Nazi Germany's pipes and tubes, 22% of Nazi Germany's wire, and 35% of Nazi Germany's explosives. It was so egregious and offensive that we find that in 1942, under the Trading with the Enemy Act, the U.S. government took over the Union Banking Corporation, in which Prescott Bush was a director, and they seized the assets. That's our current president's grandfather. Now, we know that our current president's father went out of his way to arm Saddam Hussein. How many people remember Iraqgate? I have an excellent story on that. There's monstrous, wonderful sourcing on the fact that George Herbert Walker Bush created the enemy which he fought in 1991. And so it is currently with Osama bin Laden. Now, how important is drug money? The International Monetary Fund published a report in January of this year showing that $1.5 trillion, trillion with a T, a year is laundered through the world banking system. Of that, according to Le Monde and according to the U.S. Department of Justice, it's very safe to say that $500 billion to $600 billion of that is directly the result of the drug trade. Why is drug cash important? How many people here have a credit card? All right, now I want you to be real truthful when you answer this. When you open your credit card bill every month, what do you look at first? I want everybody to look first at the total balance owing on the card. Raise your hand. How many of you look first at the minimum monthly payment required? How many of you pay your credit cards off in full every month? I'm impressed. The point is that the United States economy, and I was at an economic conference in Moscow in March of this year, has derivatives. Derivatives are anything that's not related to anything of value. It's like stock futures, it's calls, it's puts, it's options. It has a derivatives bubble of $300 trillion. 20 trillion of that alone is connected to J.P. Morgan Chase, which is about ready to go under thanks to Enron. And watch that very closely, okay? Just in March of this year, we had a wonderful piece of evidence come up from Senator Carl Levin's minority report to the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and it was a report on correspondent banks and money laundering. Now, this is a story from the Washington Post dated February 5th. It says, inattention and disinterest by U.S. banks in screening the foreign banks they take as clients has allowed rogue foreign banks, not rogue, and their criminal clients to carry on money laundering and other criminal activity in the United States and to benefit from the protections afforded by the safety and the soundness of the U.S. banking industry, said Senator Carl Levin of Michigan. Specifically mentions J.P. Morgan Chase. On the next page, 4,000 offshore banks to launder money into the United States, $1 trillion laundered annually. That's conservative. Money laundered in which the Clinton administration declared a national security threat. Not true. It's a national asset as far as Wall Street is concerned. Carl Levin said $500 billion moved through the U.S. banking system in drug money every year. That's liquid cash. And you want to know how important liquid cash in this world? There's a saying. One of my dear friends and colleagues and mentors, Catherine Austin Fitz, is a former Assistant Secretary of Housing. She was a managing director of Dillon Reed on Wall Street. She says cash flow is everything. And in an economy that's on the verge of a major implosion, without cash flow, the crash is guaranteed. Now, CIA's role is to make sure that as much of that drug money comes through the U.S. economy as possible.
When I was a little girl, I grew up at 48th and Larchwood in West Philadelphia, and the Salary Index was 100%. The Salary Index is the index that I use to describe the well-being of a neighborhood. It's the percent of people in a neighborhood who believe that a child can leave their home, go to the nearest place to buy a popsicle, and come home alone safely. It was unthinkable that a child wasn't safe at 48th and Larchwood in West Philadelphia in the 1950s. The Salary Index was 100%, and the Dow Jones Index was probably about 500. Today, it's reversed. The Dow Jones Index is very high at about 10,000, and the Salary Index is at very low in West Philadelphia and very low throughout the United States. And why is that? It's because one of the ways that we've financed the growth of multinational corporations and big banks and the rise of the Dow Jones is by selling narcotics to our children. It's one of the most profitable businesses in America. About a year ago, I gave a speech called How the Money Works in Organized Crime to a wonderful group of people in Philadelphia. They have a conference every year. They go off into the woods for about 3 days and talk about how they can help our culture, our world spiritually evolve. So I gave my presentation on how the money works as organized crime, describing what is arguably the biggest, most profitable industry in the United States today. And towards the end, we were discussing the fact that the Department of Justice estimates that the United States is the leader in laundering organized crime profits of about $500 billion to $1 trillion a year. So I asked the audience, what would happen if we stopped being the worldwide leader in laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion a year? And they said, well, you know, if we stopped, our mutual funds would go down in price, the stock market would crash. I said, well, what else would happen? So they said, well, you know, we might have trouble financing the government deficit because, in fact, the people who control 50 years of accumulated profits, that's a lot of capital that we need to finance our deficit. So I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, let's pretend there's a big red button right up here on the lectern right in front of me. And if you push that button, you can stop all organized crime in America, and you can stop America laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion of organized crime profits every year. Who here will push the button? And out of 100 people, only one person would push the button. And I said, okay, so what you're saying is you want a whole armada of people to sell drugs to your children and grandchildren to keep your mutual funds up and your government checks coming. And they said, yes, that's right. Now, there are many ways to change that. There are many ways to re-engineer our financial system and our resources so that the Solari Index and the Dow Jones can be friends. So that when we get the Solari Index to go up by making sure our neighborhoods are safe for children, the real estate can go up in value, the small businesses go up in value. There are many ways to make the Solari Index and the Dow Jones friends. But before we can do that, before we can have that conversation, we have to face what's happening. We have to face that we are addicted to drug profits, because if we can't face it, God can't fix it.
Okay. This is a copy of the cover sheet of the report. It's on the World Wide Web. If you want to go search for it, you can just look for the report on correspondent banking. Okay, and that's a copy of the report. It's an incredible read. What they don't tell you in there, of course, is that the U.S. economy is dependent upon that drug money, among other things. Now let's go a little further. Gotta love this. If this gentleman down here in the black jacket walks into a bank with a deposit of $10,001, does everybody understand that the bank has to fill out a report and send it to the U.S. Treasury indicating that he might be a money launderer? But did you happen to know that under U.S. laws, there are certain classes of business that are exempt from making currency transaction reports? Included in those are a bank, obviously, a department or agency of the U.S. government. CIA does not have to fill out currency transaction reports. An entity established under the laws of any state, But you come down to this one. A listed entity other than a bank whose common or analogous equity interests are listed on the New York Stock Exchange or American Stock Exchange, or designated as a NASDAQ national market security. If you have a company that trades on Wall Street, you can launder all the money you want to. It's legal. Gee. Now I'm just laying a little groundwork here for you before we get to September 11th. We're getting there. Just last year, a group of companies were called in to meet with Janet Reno, who's not probably the most ethical person that ever lived, and Secretary of State Deputy Treasury Secretary Stuart Eisenstadt. And these companies, Hewlett-Packard, Ford, Sony, General Motors, Whirlpool, General Electric, and Philip Morris, were called in to the Department of Justice for the amount of drug money they were laundering. Basically, the message was, you guys cool it. Okay? It's getting like out of hand. Now, let me ask a question. This gentleman right here, what's your name?
Kevin.
Kevin. Kevin is a drug lord. Kevin is the king of all drugs in South America. Okay? All right. And let's say this young lady right down here with the glasses. What's your name? Rhonda. Rhonda is the executive vice president of General Motors for the Southern Hemisphere, or South America. Okay? Kevin, you call up Rhonda one day and you say, I'd like 100 Chevy Suburbans, armor-plated, custom-built, at $30,000 each, and I'll pay cash. Rhonda, what are you going to say to that offer? All right. All right. Now, Kevin's got money that he can't spend because it's drug money. But now he's got 100 Chevy Suburbans. But let's say now that, the gentleman with his hand on his chin right there. Yeah, right there. What's your name? No, you. What's your name? Brian. Brian is Jack Welch, the chairman of General Electric. Okay? Now, Kevin, you're really good. Okay? You got $200 million that you got to move. Okay? So you call up Jack Welch's assistant, special accounts assistant. You'd say, I'd like to open in South America Kevin's Appliances. I'd like to buy $200 million of everything GE has, because I'm going to open this appliance store and I'll pay you cash. Now, Jack Welch at GE, what do you say? Right on. Let's do this deal. Now, by the way, who owns NBC? General Electric. MSNBC, CNBC, all the NBCs.